Can you believe it? It's already been 2 weeks since this invasion began. As the hostilities escalate on day 14, a new Western stunt over fighter jets to the war-torn country of Ukraine has just played out in front of the world. The United States has rejected Poland's offer of sending its MiG-29 fighter jets to Ukraine via a NATO airbase in Germany. This is being seen as Poland trying to be seen to be doing something, but not really doing anything at all. Germany has not commented just yet. Poland originally offered to send its MiG-29 fighters to the Ramstein airbase in Germany that's used as a NATO base, with American fighters also present there. Poland said it is up to the US now to send those jets to Ukraine. The US, however, has rejected the offer, calling it untenable. The US claims that Poland's offer to send MiG-29 jets to them so that it can be passed to Ukraine will raise concerns for the NATO alliance. This is the second apparent betrayal to Ukraine after the original NATO reluctance on imposing a no-fly zone over the country. Remember, NATO has repeatedly rejected Ukrainian requests to make its skies a no-fly zone so that it can stop being consistently struck from the air by the Russian Air Force. Now let's tell you why this entire offer from Poland is merely symbolic and doesn't really mean anything on the ground. Because remember, the Ukrainians, including President Zelenskyy, have said that we need a no-fly zone, or plan B is we need fighter aircraft that our pilots can fly, if not yours, and therefore please give them to us as quickly as possible. Poland has said that we'll give you these fighters and we will send them to Germany. We won't send them to Poland, but we will send them to Germany, to the Ramstein airbase. It says it's up to, they've put it in the US hands. They've said, we'll send these jets there. It's up to the US to send the jets to Ukraine. So there's that caveat also. The US says the jet offer is untenable. You're sending them to us and we'll have to send them, so one of the NATO countries will be seen as indulging in an act of war against Russia. The US is unwilling to get drawn into this war. President Biden has already made that very clear. But the US wants these NATO countries, ki aap bhej do bhaiya, you send your jets to Ukraine and help them out, but we will not play a part in it. This is being seen, the reason why we're saying this is shambolic is because this is the second big betrayal after NATO has said that we will not accede to this request from NATO, saying please impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine. Now, the Western jet stunt this is how it's playing out in Europe. That is Warsaw. That is the capital of Poland. That's the country in which all these MiG-29 fighters are. The reason why MiG-29 fighters are important is because Ukraine also flies MiG-29 fighters. So it's being seen as a commonality, a common platform that their pilots can fly with very little, conversion training. They want to send it from Warsaw to Ramstein, which is in Germany. Germany doesn't have a border with Ukraine. Poland does. In Ramstein, the plan, the sort of skeletal plan is Ukrainian pilots can go there, train on those aircraft, and they'll fly those aircraft to Ukraine, because Germany certainly doesn't want to have any part of it. The Pentagon says we cannot send Polish jets to Ukraine. We will not do that from Ramstein, because that is something that impacts the entire NATO alliance. So it's a bit of a mess. You've got the West looking actually quite silly right now, because there's already a sense of betrayal in Ukraine right now. Now they're playing Chinese checkers with their jets as part of the NATO alliance, but not actually substantively sending any forces into Ukraine. It is understandable why they don't want to do that, but these little moves between Poland and Germany and NATO and the US just shows that there is no plan in place, and that big request from NATO for air power is probably not actually going to happen. Let's go across to India Today's Geeta Mohan, who's live with me from Kyiv. She's been reporting from amidst shelling on the outskirts of Kyiv, but she's also plugged into all of the the international movements between all these countries. It would be funny if it wasn't such a serious issue, Geeta, this Polish offer of MiG-29 fighter jets, saying, we don't want to send them directly because that's going to anger Russia and, get their sights on Poland. We will send them to this NATO airbase in Germany. NATO already doesn't want to do any of this stuff. The US has categorically said, hum nahi bhejenge kisi ko. So what is the point of all this? This looks like Poland, wanting to be seen to be doing something, but not doing anything at all.
Well, Shiv, your map says it all.
Yeah.
It is, as much as it is a Ukrainian war between Ukraine and Russia, it is a war between America and Russia. And why do I say that? Look at that map that you just showed. Poland, Hungary, even Germany for that matter, they do not have the advantage of distance that US has. So while all the bullying continues, asking the European friends to stand up with Ukraine, if NATO does not come to Ukraine's rescue, Shiv, there's nothing much that Ukraine can do or that Poland or these neighboring nations can do. Why? Because they are absolutely neighboring Ukraine. If Kyiv falls, the next thing that they fear is what is going to happen to Poland. And let me tell you, it is not going to be a full-blown war between Europe and Russia, because that's not Putin is too smart for that. But it is what Putin has done already through Belarus, pushing immigrants into Poland, into Hungary. They've already suffered that entire refugee crisis from Belarus after Afghanistan, after Kabul fell. So they are really scared. Doesn't mean that they should not be coming to Ukraine's rescue, because then they should not have led leadership here in Ukraine up the Garden's path, where they promised a lot and they have really not lived up to any of it. Forget about sending these fighter jets, Shiv. If they're sending fighter jets to help Ukraine, Ukraine is screaming. And like you rightly pointed out, they first declared this entire airspace a no-fly zone. And if that does not happen, then the onslaught of Russian forces has just not been felt yet. It's just the beginning. We're talking about foot soldiers and tanks coming into Ukraine. They've not used the full power of their air force. So that's a scary scenario. Also, NATO does not want to get into a full-blown war. If they declare this entire country a no-fly zone, Russia is certainly going to violate. And if it's a NATO decree, NATO will then have to act, which means that it is going to be a war between Russia and NATO. And that is a kind of escalation that they do not really want. But at the end of the day, Shiv, it is Ukraine that has suffered a lot and continues to suffer. Civilians having to leave their homes. We were in Irpin. It was a sad state of affairs. And strategically speaking, where is the plan? You're fighting a war with Russia, but there ought to have been a plan with their European allies. And that cannot just be offers of sending.
I know there are no answers to many of these questions right now because of the way things are going. But from the ground there, I know that nothing can replace a ground reporter's perspective on this. Does the Ukrainian government sense that the tide might actually turn with NATO? Because they're continuously asking for that no-fly zone and for those aircraft. Do they believe somewhere deep inside that NATO might actually decide, whatever, let's do this because this matters to the world? Or do they not really think it's going to happen?
Well, for them, either way, they are stuck.
Yeah.
They're stuck, Shiv, because there are two scenarios over here. One is that fight the Russians alone. The Russian forces are just in the outskirts of Kyiv, which means that it is only a matter of time. We see a lot of resilience and everybody coming out and saying, we'll fight the Russians. But where is the plan? And if there isn't a strategy, a plan to fight a war against an almost superpower such as Russia, a superpower in many ways when it comes to military prowess over Ukraine and the region, they do not really have a plan. So determination aside, they do need NATO help. But if NATO comes in, then it is going to be a full-blown war, which means Ukraine will be turned to rubble. So either way, Ukraine is absolutely stuck and they need to find ways of how to get out of this. And where is that way? That way is in a particular place in Belarus where negotiations are taking place. And if you see the kind of conversation, the speech, Shiv, the speech of President Zelenskyy yesterday was very important, where he said, we are not, in an interview, not a speech, in an interview to an international network, he said, we are not falling on our knees begging to be a part of NATO. That's a significant shift. It's a significant shift because maybe there is a realization on the ground that this whole this whole concept and idea and drumbeat over joining NATO has not gone down well, even for Ukraine. Because unless and until it were to happen, if they were going to become a part of the European Union, if they were going to be included as a NATO ally and partner and a member, then it was a different story. Didn't happen. They cannot keep begging. And that's a realization, and that's a shift, a huge shift in Zelensky's stance, where he says that we are not begging.
Yes.
We are not begging NATO to take us in.
Okay.
So maybe now we'll see a shift in negotiations as well. There has to be an understanding. In all probability, that understanding would be to do with Donbass and Crimea,
Right.
and a neutral stand for Ukraine.
Okay.
We do not know how far Zelensky is really going to go, but this killing, the destruction is not going down well for Zelensky as
Right.
well. While everybody, including the opposition parties, Shiv, are rallying behind this president. It is only a matter of time when people start seeing their homes being burned, whether if the cost of this war was enough for the idea and concept to be a part of a member, a group, or a bloc that does not really want them. Or it's putting so many conditions to include them that by that time they would have been destroyed completely. Imagine the reconstruction and rebuilding.
No, you're right. You're right. That's a big question. Who's going to rebuild Ukraine? And by delaying many of these crucial decisions with each passing day, what Geeta says is absolutely right. There's going to be nothing left to join NATO or the European Union. That's the point. That may be part of the strategy as well. Geeta, stay with me, because even as Russia increases its offensive, there have been 2 ceasefires so far, but the actual combat activity on the ground is not decreasing. And we've seen it. We don't report through agencies. Our reporters have reported through the shelling that's been taking place 20 kilometers away from where the ceasefire has been taking place. Ukraine's President Zelenskyy, who's been broadcasting repeatedly from Kyiv, continues to remain defiant in this fight for his motherland. But what lies at the heart of the Russia-Ukraine conflict is what Geeta just mentioned, Ukraine's bid to get a NATO membership. While NATO's silence on the war speaks volumes, Ukraine's president blames his Western allies, who are increasingly seen as having betrayed the people of Ukraine.
Я запитав сьогодні у 27 лідерів Європи, чи буде Україна в НАТО. Запитав.
Today I've asked 27 European leaders whether Ukraine will be in NATO. I've asked directly, everyone is afraid. No one answers. But we are not afraid. We are not afraid of anything. We are not afraid to defend our country. We are not afraid of Russia. We are not afraid of talking about neutrality. We are not NATO members at the moment. But what guarantees will we get?
Ukraine's bid to get membership of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is at the heart of the Russia-Ukraine conflict that has now triggered a full-blown war. The two countries are at each other's throats. The third player, NATO, is silent over the key issues. While thousands are displaced and hundreds dead, NATO is not committing to a membership for Ukraine so far. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has also urged NATO to enforce a no-fly zone over his country's skies and protect them from Russian missiles and warplanes. NATO has not agreed to either of his demands.
NATO is a defensive alliance. Our core task is to keep our 30 nations safe. We are not part of this conflict, and we have a responsibility to ensure it does not escalate and spread beyond Ukraine, because that would be even more devastating and more dangerous.
Zelenskyy feels let down by his Western allies. He said the West could have helped Ukraine, but they witnessed our city get bombed. As the war rages in Ukraine, NATO allies seem to have made distinctions in the help they offer. While they may supply weapons to Ukraine, they will not enter the war in any active role. Ukrainians will have to defend their land themselves. Bureau Report, India Today.
Now, on the back of many days of airstrikes, with Poland now offering its fighter jets, but in a kind of very indirect sort of manner, which may not even mean anything to the Ukrainians, we have a special report coming up on the other side of this break that you do not want to miss. The Russia-Ukraine air war has become front and center on 14 days of this crisis. Don't miss our special report from Kyiv. Gaurav Sawant anchoring from the besieged city on the other side on the big Air Force war between Ukraine and Russia. That's next.